Hi everyone, and welcome to Lead a Horse to Water, the Equine Training and Behaviour podcast. I'm your host, Trudy Dempsey, and today I am so pleased to say that I have with me Katrina Per Carruthers, and she's joining me from Canada, and we're going to have a good old natter about training and behaviour. But first of all, Katrina, welcome, and tell us a little bit about you and your interactions with horses, and maybe a little bit about your crossover into positive reinforcement training.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Katrina. I guess my horse story is pretty typical, but I grew up in a city. So I had never actually seen a real alive horse until my teens. And then I got the bug, let's say, and I became quite obsessed, and both of my parents were very disappointed. And I became a working student. I found all kinds of jobs in the industry that I could, and I became very involved to the point where I became a manager of a riding school for a really cool lady. Her name was Diana Epps. And despite being very traditional, she was really ahead of her time. So I got some exposure to some really good concepts about horsemanship. So things like lots of turnout, having horses barefoot. She was always really kind to them, and the horses always had tons of time off. Like, they were never really overworked schoolies. And I learned a ton, and she gave me way more responsibility than I deserved. And I got to teach, 30, 40 hours a week with not enough experience to be teaching that much. But it was pretty amazing. So I spent 10 years doing that, and while completing my degree in psych and communications. And I also became a registered massage therapist in that time. And after 10 years, I decided I needed a break, and I needed to step away from horses, from burnout and all that jazz. And then the pandemic hit, and I immediately bought a horse. That horse was a really interesting behavior case. And that's what's kind of sent me down the spiral of behaviorism and behavior modification. And that's how I met the amazing Lauren Fraser and all of these incredibly smart horsewomen. And it took me out of my little box of classical dressage and into this whole other world. And despite having played around with clicker training, I didn't think it was very useful or very good because of the way that I had been taught it. And it was after this mare and then my current horse that I really dove into it hard. And Sam Wise, who's a halflanger that Trudy has helped me a lot with, has been a wonderful exploration in the incredibly scientific, intelligent, smart, thoughtful way of training using positive reinforcement. And I also started doing dog sports, and that was also all positive reinforcement. So I think that's how I crossed over. I came from a very traditional but open-minded side of things, and then I just had this opportunity with this really challenging horse, and then met all of these amazing women. So this is where we are now.
And that's it. There she is.
Yeah.
Well, I think what I love about that backstory is the fact that you started with somebody who, nowadays it becomes a bit of a them and us, or we do it the right way, we're using positive. But actually, there are a lot of things. I don't think that is true anyway, but there are a lot of things about some of the older horse people. I remember when I was a kid growing up, we just did some things that we do now, which we think are special now, but we used to do them then. I never kept my first ponies in. It wasn't until I got, sort of further down the line with show ponies, and then everyone's thinking, well, you've got to keep them in because they've got to keep clean. Their legs have got to stay clean. You can't have them turned out with a... So actually, my upbringing in horses was really about that, considering the situation, a bit like we are in positive reinforcement all the time. It's always about the antecedent, what the environment's doing. And so that kind of, I didn't plan that, honest, but that kind of brings us around a little bit to what we are going to talk about today. So I have to thank Katrina for suggesting this topic, because I do steer away from mainstream a lot. A while back, somebody said to me, who's your audience? And I thought about it a lot, and I wanted it to be mainstream, but look at all the other episodes. I'm very niche, and I'm really not mainstream at all. But clicker training, positive reinforcement is coming. I listened to a podcast just today where one of our big natural horsemen in the UK is actually looking at learning theory and using a bit of clicker training. And I'm thinking, wow, we are stepping a little bit closer. So Katrina's idea was that we should investigate some things that can go wrong and how you traditionally would have treated that, to kind of how now we would look at it in terms of that lens of positive reinforcement. Is that about it? Am I roughly
Yeah, I think you're definitely on it. I think I also wanted to kind of demonstrate with you, like as an exercise together, about how the issue with positive reinforcement isn't so much the use of cookies or treats, because I think people are over that. It's more the mental jump that you have to make in how you think about the problems, the questions that you're asking, the arrangements that you're making to elicit a behavior. It's just it's flipping traditional training a little bit on its head. And I think that jump from, well, you would just add more pressure, it would solve the problem, to how do I arrange this in a very different way and set it up differently is the trick, really. And I think learning how to ask those questions, or learning how to flip a problem on its head that you've solved a certain way for 100 years is hard. So I wanted to explore that with you.
Yeah, only this morning I had a brand new student who's really great at this stuff with other species, and we're talking through the options with horses, and I said there is nothing you can't train with it. Nothing.
Yeah.
But you might not have, not her personally, but we as humans might not have the mindset to do that today, and that horse might not be in the right place to be doing it today. But we are only really sort of narrowed in by our own lack of looking and seeing that there are those other ways of doing it. So I love that. Well, the first example you came up with was the mounting block, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
So should we dig into that one first, and let's
Sure.
have a think. Have you had situations when you're teaching where you have had to retrain mounting block for other people or your own horse, or give us some background on why this question?
It came up because I was laughing at some of the advice that I had been given in the past about my own horse, and how I didn't really agree with it at the time, and how I wasn't sure how to solve it otherwise, but I didn't want to go down the route that I had been suggested. And so with mounting block issues, I think just like a blanket statement about all of these things is that training comes after welfare. So we have to make sure that the horses aren't in pain, and that's not the reason these behaviors are showing up. And I always feel like I need to put like a big blanket disclaimer on everything that I say, like make sure it's not in pain.
Yeah, I always say, I don't apologize for keep saying this. There is a whole episode somewhere way back on that, guys. So if you want to pick that up, if you're new to the podcast, go back and find that one, because we underline everything we do in training with, first of all, minimum 3 F's, Lauren Fraser's Friends, Forage and Freedom, and a healthy horse living its very best. That's minimum, and from then on we can start to train. So we just assume that is said, just in case anybody's firing to saying, no, you didn't mention the pain. Yes, there's a lot of
because mounting block behaviors are often pain related, and so I just wanted to put that out there. But in the case of sometimes it's like the school pony that's just kind of had it. I've run into mounting block issues with students, and I have been given the advice that you should move their feet a lot at the block. So this idea that you stand on the mounting block, you send the horse in a circle around it, you change directions a bunch of times, you move their hindquarters a lot until they stand still at the block. And so that was one method that was frequently suggested.
That comes from, you do make the right thing easy, so when they stand still you do nothing, and the wrong thing hard, so when they won't stand nicely and they're fidgeting, then you move them, you keep them moving. There are many ways of looking at why people move their feet. We don't prescribe to that, obviously, but if anyone wants to look at that, there are some articles in the IABC Foundation journal where Alice Campbell looks at pressure and release techniques and the old-fashioned natural horsemanship, and looks at a lot of the science behind it. So we don't need to do that, she's done that. So carry on. So that's one method of mounting block training.
The other is to essentially prevent the horse from making another option, right? So to choke up the reins really tight, have the horse either flex towards you or away from you, depending on which school of horsemanship you were taught, and to really ensure that the horse cannot in any way, shape, or form, leave the block. And one of the issues that we run into in Canada a lot with imported horses, particularly from Ireland, is that they don't actually know what a mounting block is because they've only had leg ups. And so you end up with a lot of mounting block accidents from imported horses from the UK. And that's another one that we run into, just like people not thinking and just lining them up and getting on without any sort of thought process, or the horse is moving, the horse has always done that, we just get on while it's moving. So those were sort of the main three things that I wanted to say about mounting blocks as the main sort of solutions that I had seen.
Yeah, no, definitely the leg up in racing yards. That's very typical. There'll be a lad legging up the jockeys to go out for morning exercise, and it's just quick because they don't have time. In their book, they don't have time to put into standing still to get on. So then you go, I don't anymore, but I used to go racing and I would see people in the ring being put on like that, and oh my goodness, you have like a split second to get your foot in that person's hand and on, and that's it, you know, they've gone. And I think we've all known horses that you kind of line up at the mounting block and your foot's in the stirrup. And I remember probably 2 or 3 Iberians in, I got one that had in theory been trained, but yeah, bless him, he was a sweetheart, but he'd had no idea of standing still at the mounting block. And I just, you know, it took me a while, but I was not happy to hang around with that one. So yeah, those are, I think, typically. And what do you feel about, you know, so what are they using? If we're talking in behavioral terms, what do you feel that those are offering to the horse to change behavior?
I think you've got, in some instances, I think when it's applied kindly, it's negative reinforcement, and it's done as like very clearly negative reinforcement, pressure release. And in other instances, it's flooding, because if you're just making no option available to the horse, right, and they're not happy about it, and you send them around in circles till they're sweating and then they stand still, that's not them standing still because it's a behavior, that's them giving up, and that's flooding. And then the other cases, I think it truly is punishment. They're being punished for walking off. You know, it's like you get half on, the horse starts to walk, you seesaw them back. And that's punishment. It's not negative reinforcement. So I think you have many quadrants in use at any given time, and none of them are in the positive reinforcement box. And there's fallout from that. And I think you can see it, you know. You have horses who have mounting block issues their whole life. They're just like that. You have horses who throw out more violent behaviors and then require more pressure. You have horses who dance at the block forever. You have people who come up with all sorts of quirky systems, like tie stalls to get on, or in the stall to get on. Yeah, I think there's smarter ways of doing things.
Yeah, without a doubt. And we should maybe, just in case somebody happens upon this who isn't a regular listener to the podcast, we should just say, in terms of the so-called quadrants, which we try and avoid using, but it's just handy to use as a terminology. We've got positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. And the idea of punishment is that behavior reduces, so walking off at the mounting block reduces. The idea of positive or negative reinforcement, in spite of the word, is that you get more behavior. So applying either food for getting it right, or removing the pressure for them getting it right, you see more standing still at the mounting block. What I would say is that in most of these cases, you don't see a reduction, especially when you're using punishment. So if you're using that crank on the hand to hurt the mouth, you really aren't. And the reasons are like way too many to go into in a shorter podcast. But I do think it's interesting that we maybe touch on briefly, why do we think horses don't stand? Apart from the fact they haven't been trained to, a lot of horses pick up patterns and routines. That's good and bad. But, you know, what are the reasons that a horse might not want to stand at the mounting block, even if you put a fair bit of training to try and change it?
Well, I think we've already touched on pain. So that's always my number one thing. Yeah. And it's also, the mounting block predicts the riding portion as well.
Yeah.
And so if the riding is not done in a way that is enjoyable to the horse, or is enriching to the horse, or is useful in any way to the horse, they can become that sort of behavior of like not enjoying it can chain up to right up to grooming, or right up to when your car pulls up to the yard. And it can just be this whole experience, like your presence is now aversive. And so the mounting block is just part of that picture. And, you know, it's it's interesting because even in a traditional context, like I was saying, because my old trainer was really quite delightful, really quite capable, a lot of horses' mounting block issues did disappear over time because the riding was a lot softer.
Yeah.
And I think the mounting block is a good predictor of how the horse feels about the rest of what you're doing.
Yeah. And just to add to that, the rest of what you're doing might not be bad riding. It might be
No.
leaving home. It might be going out of the gate, which your horse is utterly terrified of doing.
Yeah.
And I know everyone thinks, why? Why should that be? Why wouldn't my horse go out hacking without a problem? The reality is, for a lot of people, hacking out, going out on trails is not easy. It's not easy
Yeah.
for them. And so that, again, it's that predictor of what's happening, why is it happening? And if we can find the function of the mounting block not standing, obviously pains are number one, because however many times people tell me, oh no, my horse doesn't have any pain, I'll guarantee there are so many little things out there that we'll never know about. And I've seen it change a horse's behavior and change back quickly from things like abscesses, where, you know, the pain's really uncomfortable, but it does go, and it goes in a really, so once it starts to move, that abscess, the pain is almost miraculously disappeared. And so you can see that change in behavior really quickly. So yeah, so we now know potentially why they might not stand at the mounting block. We know therefore that all of those measures have to basically separate that first of pain, check for discomfort, and work out that if you always get on and then go out of the gate and your horse isn't happy, so you can do tests. We maybe one day we'll talk about that, but you know, right here we won't. But you know, you can test your ideas out and come to some sort of conclusion as to maybe, if you've got an open mind, why your horse isn't standing at the mounting block. So we've got to this place where the horse has been treated and their pain is gone, and we're in a great place to train. And we know it's now no longer a problem with leaving home. They're really good about everything leaving home in hand, and they're fine. So how do we train the mounting block? What would you have done before you found positive reinforcement with your kinder trainer? How do you think that would have gone?
Honestly, we probably would have used food, but it would have been in a very management-oriented kind of approach. I know management isn't the best word to use, but it would have been very much like shove food in the horse's face while you get on.
Yeah.
Or align the mounting block so that you have the wall right in front of it, so the horse can't walk off. Or build a higher mounting block so you're not having to put so much weight in the stirrup. So we did a lot of that. And also just, you know, things like having a person on the ground to hold the horse, and just not having the other behavior be an option.
Yeah.
And I think all of those are reasonable approaches. I think there's just an even smarter approach.
Yeah,
now.
I think very reasonable. And in some ways, the thought process behind them is what we use with positive a lot of the time. So we're using props to help us give the horse an idea about what the behavior we want them to offer is. We are like with the wall, setting them up with something in front, either a handler or a wall, is just closing one door and saying, here you are, this is out, this is off limits, you can't go this way. So it just gives the horse information. I think one of the things that even with positive reinforcement, one of the things that I've worked at, which is just like such a simple fix, is that as you walk up to the mounting block, lead your horse from the outside, not the near side where you're going to get on, the outside, and then disappear around their tail and go on the mounting block from behind. And because it changes what their expectation of the mounting block is, and B, as you climb up the mounting block with your horse in your hand, the left rein in your hand, 9 times out of 10, inadvertently, you're putting pressure on that rein, and your horse moves their arse out of the way, and you're like, stupid horse, why isn't it standing straight? So
that rein of opposition, I tell you.
Yeah, so all you need in some cases, you don't even have to resort to being a clever clicker trainer. You can just be savvy about setting your environment up better. But then, of course, if we do it with food, we're going to have a much nicer feel, aren't we, to the whole thing, I think. Anyway, so what would you do now differently, do you think, with positive reinforcement?
Well, I think first off, I would approach the horse differently. So like the The problem not being that the horse doesn't stand at the block. Like that isn't really the problem. The problem would be that either the horse doesn't know how to stand while I approach, which is always a curious thing, or the horse maybe is actually just really unsure of the block itself. And so I might parse out that question a lot further into smaller pieces that I can find success at. And so instead of it being like, I need to get on today's training might just be, can we stand still while I approach from the side? Can we stand still while I walk behind you? Can we stand still while I walk up to the block with you 5 feet away? Because sometimes those elevation changes are a problem. So you standing above the horse is really a trigger for them to move. So I think I would approach it much more like an experiment and much less like a hiccup in my training session that I just needed to get over.
Yeah.
So firstly, I think I would parse that out. And then I think too, I would apply different techniques to help the horse understand what the question was rather than making all other options unavailable. Because I want the horse to participate in the training now more than I feel like I need to. I feel less like I need to be the instigator of the behavior or that I am in control of all the behaviors. And instead, it's more of a conversation like, hey, how about we try this today and see how you feel about it? And in some ways, it's slower. And in other ways, it's a heck of a lot faster. The kinds of behaviors that I have built up with your help with my little halflinger, who's a disaster, in case anybody wants to watch our little Instagram. He's a delight, but he is a disaster. They're amazing and they're solid and they're repeatable and I can move them into any environment. And if there's a mounting block anywhere in the world, he knows how to line up and he'll stand and let me get on, which I think is really neat. So it's less specific. It's more, the behavior is generalized much nicer. And it's much more reliable and I don't have to worry for my life every time I think about it, which is also a nice feeling.
It's a lovely feeling. I love that feeling. Yeah. I agree absolutely with all of that. I think the other thing that people should do is, first of all, describe the behavior they want. I see a lot of people do this very clever, get to the top of the mounted block, call the horse over, wiggle the horse's bum and shoulders to get into line. And it's actually, for most people, a fiddle to train that way. I mean, I know it looks smart on social media videos. I get that. But for me, the most important thing is that it's so easy that the horse knows really clearly. So right at the beginning, when I'm doing those standstills that you're suggesting, that you get the horse to understand how waiting patiently and moving, fading you into the equation, be that on the left, the right, up high, wherever it is, I think that then informs you right from the start. The horse needs to be lined up in this way. It needs to be this. Once I put the mounting block there in place, it needs to come to this point. So there's some really boring stuff, which I know horse people want it all to come from the heart and smell of roses and it all be about relationship. But actually, people, get out there and be blinking better at setting up your environment. Because if your horse knows what to do and they clearly know what the behavior is, and I love a pole, but you could use mats, whatever you want to teach your horse to stand still. But I'd really like to just keep it simple and just fade everything else in, like you say. But yeah, I think that plan of how do you want it to end up looking is like something we forget. So what's it? And also the thing, you train all this. You train leaning over, arms over, leg over, sit on. And then you do it for real when you might need to worry about who's around and the horse moving off, and you go to pick up your reins and your horse just shoots off again because it's reverting to previous behavior. So it's, like you say, it's that every little tiny morsel of information is important. But once you start thinking like that, it's just a lot easier, I think, a lot clearer for the horse, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think I wrote some things down while you were talking. I hope that's okay.
Of
and I thought
course
if I just restated what you said in a nice clear 1, 2, 3, it might help people. So the first thing was to have your criteria really clearly defined, like know exactly what it is that you want. Yeah. Secondly is to set up your environment in a clever way. And lastly is to keep it very simple.
Yeah.
Like keep your ass simple. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's perfect. Love it. But, we could then apply that So we're not going into an in-depth, this is how we train it, but we're giving you
No.
some ideas, people, of how you might be able to do that. I think your second example was going to be, you know, a fence, a jumping horse who's gone into a fence and maybe stopping, or, you know, anyway, things have broken down for this jumper. I don't know whether he was a superstar previously or what, doesn't matter. Maybe your horse has never wanted to go over a jump. You know, I have horses that are a bit nervous even around a pole, and it takes time, you know. But yeah, so can you outline what this behavior looks like we want to change?
So I had thought of this one because I see this a lot at horse shows, and I used to do a lot more coaching at a much higher level, I'll say higher level, different level, a competitive level, than I do now, because now I mostly just deal in behavior and have fun. But jumping a fence after a refusal is something that I see people screw up all the time at all levels. And I see this in the Grand Prix ring. I see this at home. I see this everywhere. So let's say that you are in a new environment, you're jumping a fence that the horse at home has jumped really well, and you get into the show ring, the horse jumped the warm-up jump. Let's just say it's a Liverpool for the sake of a visual. The horse jumps Liverpool in the warm-up, maybe he overjumps it a bit. Really tidy, fancy jump. Everyone thinks it's great. You get into the show ring, the second fence is the Liverpool, horse slams on the brake. Horse leaves the ring, and now we go back to the warm-up, and they try to jump the Liverpool at the same height as it was in the ring, in the warm-up ring. And then you have another refusal. And then you hit the horse on the approach the third time because your coach is telling you have to get over it. And now you have a third refusal. And then you break the fence down, and now the horse is refusing everything. And you have your next class coming in. And in a worst case scenario, your horse goes through the first gate, hits the first fence, and gets to leave again. So now the horse has learned that hitting the fence and leaving are connected. And you've now created a bigger problem with your Liverpool that maybe wasn't an issue at home. And I think this is a really interesting example of how thinking about this a bit differently could solve so many problems in that environment, because going over a fence isn't that complicated, right? You go over it, then you're done. And the horses, I find, understand that assignment quite easily. Like, you see the jump, you go over it, and then you go to the next one, and then you jump 8 or 12 fences and you leave, especially if it's the hunters like we have here, where it's always 8 or 9 fences, and it's on a pattern that's super predictable. So the horses really get to know it. And so if you're getting a refusal, there's often a good reason. So that was my example.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example. And I think the other example I've seen throughout my life is the rider gets off, goes to their lorry and beats crap out of the horse. And we've already spoken a little bit about punishment. Positive punishment is the addition of something that you hope is going to reduce the behavior in future. Whether it is positive punishment comes down to whether you see less behavior. Now, beating your horse up in a lorry, it's inexcusable on any level, is not the thing that you should be doing. But even if you think it changes it, it just is not going to. That's just one angry person. The other place that I think it doesn't work is once the horse has stopped, and as they're turning away from the fence, you then crack them with the whip as well. And again, punishment, you hope in telling your horse off that he won't stop again. But it doesn't change the reasons why the horse might have stopped in the first place. And, you know, let's face it, there can be loads of things, especially if it's a new venue. You know, things like here in the UK, you get some, or used to when we used to go out, some quite dark arenas. So the horses come in from an open air warm up and they come into a dark area. We know how long it takes horses, a lot longer than us, for their eyes to accustom to the change in light. So there could be a glint of sun coming in on one jump. Who knows? There could be a noise, there could be a smell. We don't know. It could just be like, you know, your scenario where they've crashed it in the warm up and then they come in and there's no way they have the confidence in you to jump anymore. But punishing at that place is no help. Now, the other one that you mentioned, which I always think is quite funny, you know, you're riding in, show them you're confident by giving them a whack, you know, even if it's down the shoulder, you're telling them, you're saying, like, you know, I'm in charge, you're going to be okay because I've got you. Like hell have you got me? You know, I crashed into the one in the warm-up, I crashed into this one 3 times, and now you're still asking me. I have no confidence in you at all. It's this belief that humans can, by their bravery, get horses to do stuff. What do we think? Do brave people get horses to do stuff? I mean, because we do know that there are enough videos online that purport to show that. We know that this is
well, sure. I think aggressive riders get horses to do stuff, but I think that's because the horse is more afraid of you than it is of the obstacle in front of you. Yeah. And I've had coaches tell me that the horses should be more afraid of you than they are of the jump. And I've heard that phrase more than once. And I think there's a fundamental issue with that phrase from just like a welfare standpoint. But even just from a learning theory standpoint, it's a bit bonkers because there's always going to be something in the world that's more scary than you are. Yeah. And so if you are always the most scary thing, well, then now we have other issues too that arrive. But I do think, you know, when we talk about hitting a horse with jumping, the question is, what are we punishing? And is it actually a behavior? Is refusing the fence the behavior that you're trying to modify, or is jumping the fence the behavior you're trying to modify? And I think if your goal is to jump the fence, your modifier should be applied to the fence, not to the refusal. And I mean I know that it should be applied that way. But when we talk about the refusal as the thing that we're trying to decrease or increase, it's not really a behavior that you can put on repeat in practice and help and change, really. I mean, you can definitely have it occur over and over and over again, and then the horse is finding some sort of reason for why that is more beneficial than going over the jump. And beating them certainly isn't going to change that. It
often makes people feel better. It makes you feel like you're being proactive. And if somebody is stood there watching you, there's enough videos of top trainers hitting horses. We don't have to go into that. There's been enough of it in recent times that we don't have to go into that. We know it happens. So all the people that are saying, grassroots people are often a lot kinder to their horses, but they
much kinder
to these professional riders, assuming these professional riders are like, some sort of God who doesn't have to do this. But I wanted to hop back to your being the most scary thing. There will, as you say, at some point, there will be something else that's more, either the horse shuts down and they won't want to jump, they won't even want to walk out their stable, even however scary you are. They just go, say, I don't want this situation where I'm constantly flooded by you, and I have no voice. And that is always harmful. It's harmful to the horse's behavior of jumping, but it's also harmful to any relationship you have. But it's one that we see quite a lot. People send horses away for training to really tough trainers who can sit it out and look good on the back of a horse that's bucking or rearing or refusing. And they become so frightened of that person, then that person takes that horse home. It ain't fixed anything, No. They go, well, I'm not as scared of you as I was of that person. Now I'm gonna my behavior, I'm gonna chuck everything out because I found that little wedge in your armor, and that's that little dink, and I can get in there. And so I think it's just so problematic, the idea of being the toughest person and being strong and being brave, and there should be no bravery in riding. I'm sorry, if we're riding courses that need us to hold on for grim death and just grit our teeth, and I think it's wrong. I think we have to change that going forward, but that's another entirely other conversation. So look, let's be more positive then and think about how could we, thinking about our mounting block conversation, how do we fix this issue?
So I think that the trick in jumping is really to think about how you taught it at the beginning. Like, what was the successful way that it was taught? And most of the time when you're starting out with a really young green horse and you're jumping, people are really good with them. They're kind, they have long reins, they sit in a light seat, they leave the horse alone. If the horse stops, they just turn, they come back. And the horse starts to develop some confidence over a small fence. And depending on which kind of fence you first started them on, some people start on cross rails, some people start on small verticals, it doesn't really matter. But if you can when you have a refusal and you're concerned about whether or not the horse will jump the next fence. Knock it down to a pole. How did you teach jumping? Go back to the very, very beginning and rebuild your behavior at a point where there is almost no chance of it failing.
Yeah.
Sometimes, we knock it down 3 inches, 6 inches, or what have you, but that's not the same thing. And so you might have another refusal, and now you have an even bigger problem where you could have simply just dropped it down to the ground, gone over the pole back and forth on a nice loose rein, rebuilt your jump up until the horse is like, oh, okay, I've got this. And then added in your piece that was the problem, but again, at a much lower criteria, and a lower criteria can be that you don't set the horse up to jump from a perfect distance. The lower criteria can be that you jump it on the buckle. The lower criteria can be that you come in at a trot or that you come in at a walk. And I think that that's where people make the mistake, is that they escalate all of their pressure and all of their feelings and all of their desire to get over this jump at the base of the fence, instead of thinking about, well, how do we rebuild this behavior so that it's more consistent? And it's much, much easier to go back to zero than it is to go back from, now you've got fear built in and all these other big feelings.
Yeah, you've got a lot to repair if you don't go back far enough. And I guess the other thing to say on top of that is, we never just go more. We go a little bit more, back down, a little bit more, back down, a little bit more. And so you're kind of just gradually knocking that threshold up a little bit over different sessions. You're not just going, I can do 30 centimeters, I can do 75, I can do a meter. Now I'm back up to 130. You just don't go in that one direction. And I think as well, the other thing to say is, I used to, the only jumping I used to enjoy, because I'm not particularly the bravest person over a fence, but would be a grid. So back chaining is everything, building those chains of behavior and adding something positive when you get to the end of, it could be just trot across pole, get to the other side, stop and give the horse. You don't need to know when to click. None of that is important.
No.
You can just add, like, walk over the pole, stop, here's a cookie. Walk over 2 poles, stop, here's a cookie, and again, by cookie, we don't
solve so many problems.
There's a lot of discussion about cookies sometimes in social media. No, it is natural horse food we are using. It will be some sort of grass-based product, just in case anyone thinks we really are filling our horses up with sugar.
No.
It's more of a side of the pond. We rarely use it here in the European side, the term cookie, but it has definitely more your side. But it's not real cookies, people. But so I think
we just use hay pellets or something.
So but for me, I think I love what you said, and totally agree. That's a really quick talk through how to rebuild your horse's confidence when they have. But again, obviously, we're saying find out why, if you can. If the problem persists, obviously you want to know why they're running out, what's happening, what's occurring. I say eyesight good, whatever.
Particularly if it's a repeated behavioral problem, like if it's a repeated problem, like if you've had multiple refusals in the same sort of environment, or if you've had multiple instances where the horse stops in specific places, that's a different problem than one that you created because the horse crashed a fence or had a refusal one time. And if you're smart about it, when they have a refusal one time and you take it a little bit seriously and you rebuild the behavior from there, you have a much lower chance of running into your bigger issues where you have horses doing all sorts of things. One thing I wanted to quickly talk about was a scale of aggression with jumping. Is that something we can go into a little bit?
Go on.
So in dogs, I think people are pretty familiar with the scale of aggression in terms of the growling, and then if you punish the growling, you end up with biting with no growling, and all of the pieces that come before that. And I think jumping is a really easy example of seeing how the scale of aggression I'm just adopting it to horses, and it's not really aggression, but the scale of behaviors you don't want increases, and the height of those behaviors increases when you punish the previous behavior. So in a horse who's worried about a fence, you might have a hard look to start, and then you might have a hard look and a slow stop. And then you might have a really hard stop right at the base. Then you might have a stop, a turn, a buck, a bolt, a spin. and all of these other behaviors. Or you might have the horse that launches towards the fence, lands, and takes off. So you have all of these different behaviors that are sort of like escalatingly problematic. And if you punish that first one, that stop and look 5-10 feet away or 20 feet away, what you end up with the horse not displaying those early warning signs that they're worried about it, and then having a massive reaction.
Yeah.
And those elicit more punishment from riders, I think partially because of fear and also partially due to control.
Yeah.
And they were more justified in that use of that aversive piece of equipment, or more justified in their punishing methods, because the horse is displaying these massive behaviors out of nowhere, in quotation marks. And so I think it's really important that we look at jumping a little bit differently, and we look at it as, if the horse has a problem early on, and that problem can be as simple as looking hard at it, we just rebuild it. And if you did that, we would have significantly more confident horses and significantly fewer accidents.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So what we're saying is you need to be a very good observer of behavior in your own horse, which most people are. So when you feel that you can't see the hard look, you can feel the hard look, which is suddenly there's nothing on your leg. You're like, oh, okay, this is like, concrete. I can't feel that we can move through this. That's your point to stop. The moment you feel that, not when you've got close to the fence and you've worked it and still not got through the concrete. The time is to notice it and think, hold your hand up. I mean, I have definitely in dressage tests held my hand up as I've gone down the center line and retired, because I know that horse is, we're barely going to turn off the center line. Why? I don't know on that day, but what's the point? Because I've got dressed up and platted my horse up to go to this show. Do I really have to go through with it? But I think those are the pressures that we put on ourselves.
But this starts at home, right? And I think that's, if you're at a horse show and you're running into these problems, you've already missed your point, right? Like you've already missed the point of listening to your animal and really coming to a nice place. And I think it's unfortunate the horse shows are so expensive to enter, because I know why you feel like you need to get it done. And I know how awful it is to show up and scratch everything. I've done it. It sucks. And it's unfortunate that there's not a nice way to get your money back or credit for a different class or what have you. But it really is, it's an at-home problem first. And these problems don't just randomly show up at shows. Like there's always those behaviors are present. They're just exaggerated when you take them off.
Yeah, absolutely. But although I would say in something like dressage, there might be those environmental conditions.
Oh, absolutely.
Of a really busy warm-up area, and then by the time you go up that center line, there is that everything is push, trigger stacked up to the, and then it's like, oh my God, there's flowers. There's a judge's
and then
car,
it's also dead silent.
Yeah.
Like you go from this busy, loud environment, and then you go into the dressage ring, and now it's dead quiet. You could hear a pin drop, and the horses have no idea what to do with it. Yeah, but I think that you can solve some of those problems.
You can. The same with the mounting block. It's being a great observer, thinking around the problem, splitting it, split as much as you can, reduce your expectations, reward handsomely. We would say reinforce, but we're trying to talk to a slightly wider audience here, so add the food when you've gone around the course of jumps or over each individual jump, rather than thinking that you can change behavior with a whip or a spur.
Yeah, and really roll with your pattern of easy, hard, easy. Make it easy, add a little, make it easy again.
Yeah.
Don't just go up and up and up on the hard scale.
Yeah.
Hard
so
that was my
Yeah, cool.
So that was my big rant about jumping. So thank you for listening.
No, that's cool, because I don't really appeal to those people, Even some of my clients, I say, I'm very niche on the podcast. You probably won't. It's probably not your thing, I know it's your thing because we are sort of as geeky. Now, I want to quickly touch on your last one so that we can make this not too long, because it's amazing how when you get chatting to somebody who like you, that you just keep chatting. But you mentioned problems with forward, i.e. the horse wanting to go forward. So that I think is a very common one. I'm always using this example of when I'm in my car on Little Devon narrow lanes and I'm following horses, And, you know, I'm watching those legs going bang, 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 bang. And the only way that horse is walking is if that bang, bang, bang of the legs on is constant. And as soon as they stop, so it's a kind of backwards cue. So normally we'd like the leg to mean go and stop mean something entirely different. But in this case, the horse thinks that only when the leg is constantly on is it go. And as soon as the leg stops, that is halt. And I mean, we know it's for training, but
Yeah.
we can dig in a little bit to the negative reinforcement side, even though we are passionate about using positive reinforcement. I think we can make more horses' lives better by mentioning that you could be better at the negative reinforcement. The pressure and release is not a bad thing. You're not a baddie because you're using negative reinforcement, but you could apply it a lot better if you. So give us some examples of what you were thinking of in terms of, you know, horses being responsive or not responsive to the leg. I'm guessing you've come across quite a lot in your career.
Yeah. And I think this problem, I like really want to speak to coaches on this one, because I don't think it's fair to put this one on amateur riders at all. It's not your fault that your horse doesn't go forward. This is a coaching problem. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I think it stems from this culture that more leg solves problems. And like there's t-shirts with more leg on them and hats and sayings at the barn, and it drives me mental because more leg doesn't do anything but add more leg. And if the horse doesn't know what the leg means to begin with, adding more of something doesn't change the behavior. It doesn't do anything. It's a really dumb, I will say it, it's stupid. It's a really stupid way to think about training. Adding more leg doesn't create more go unless it's been taught on a cue. And it hasn't, because you're using more leg for a walk or a trot. Like you're not even doing anything fun. Like there's no lateral work going on there. There's no extended canter going on there. It's just to just simply move. And it's a real issue with this idea that you need to add more and more pressure in order to get the animal to respond to you. And it's a lie.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah. But one thing we can do is dig into when it happens. So if we lead the horse in from the field, from the paddock, does it walk out? Yes. I mean, we'll just, I took an example. There are so many permutations of this, it's impossible to go into.
Does the horse move on its own without your help?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Can that horse move? Fine. Yes, it can.
Yes.
Does it walk into the stable, the barn? Well, yes. Fine. Does it walk with you leading it with its saddle on? Yes. Does it stand to line up at the mounting block? Yes. Fine. All these things are great. But then you get on and it doesn't want to move. That's the simple scenario that we'll go with for the sake of brevity in this situation. But, if anyone wants us to break anything else down in future, just shout, because we can break stuff down. But I think so it's a bit about being a detective. So make sure there's nothing. Is it because the arena's not a nice place for that horse because they don't have their friends there? So could you take a buddy along to go with them? So we are now just saying we've checked all that, and it is only the fact that the horse doesn't have a flying clue what our cue of leg means.
Well, and this is the one that I find myself teaching over and over and over again, like even when I was teaching more traditional work, and it always blew people's minds. But there's so much, it's this idea, this pressure cooker, like you put on tons of leg, you start putting 5, 10, 15 pounds of pressure on with your leg to get the horse to take a step at the walk. And then you've got a death grip with your leg for the whole ride. And it's, and these are the kinds of horses that take 20 minutes to warm up and 3 canters before they can even do anything. And the first canter is awful because the riders are leaning forward and shoving their bum in the saddle and kicking and flailing their arms around. And you're like, I have no idea which one of those 15 things you did is the cue for go, other than the horse has given up and is try to canter now. Yeah. So it's trying to really have people understand that one cue can be related to one behavior, and one ask with the leg is enough to get the walk, and one squeeze is enough to get a trot, and one leg position is enough to get a canter, and that you don't need, not even that you don't need more leg, is that if you're using more leg, you're screwing up your previous cue because now you have a new cue you're adding. And it's just such messy, crappy training. It
And it's
really is.
hard
It's
work
crappy.
riding,
It's so much
like that.
work.
Yeah.
I'm way too lazy to ride like that. And
Yeah.
horses don't like it.
Yeah.
Like, and people who say their horse likes a lot of leg, I challenge you to rethink that, because I don't believe you. And I've yet to meet a horse that likes more leg. It may not perform without more leg, but that's not the same as liking or disliking it.
Yeah.
But when you
Absolutely.
add leg like that, not only are you adding tons of pressure for no reason and making yourself sweat really hard, you lock your hip up. Your hip's not following your horse. Your arms aren't following your horse. There's
Yeah.
a cascade of problems that come from this leg thing, and it drives me a bit batty, as you can tell. I'll calm down now.
I totally agree. So if you're using negative reinforcement and you're not yet ready to train with positive reinforcement,
Yeah.
you can make your horse's life a lot better. Let go of the rein, right? On the buckle,
Yep.
take your leg off before you put it on. So breathe
Yep.
your leg away. Just let your leg do the lightest little touch. And even if your horse just kind of does this little, oh, that was something. Yes, take your leg off.
Yeah.
Just try it. I used to, when I was training traditional people, I would do this. I'd say, just sit there and do nothing. And it breaks your heart as the rider, because you sit there and you think,
Yes.
where is this going to ever go? And if a horse didn't have a problem underlying it, then it always worked. But it would take time, because you've got to shape that and put more steps and, but yeah, fundamentally, we open all the doors and say, I don't care which way you move. You could move sideways. I would even be happy if you move backwards, just that you're listening, that I change something in the environment. It's me, and I'd rather that wasn't necessarily the case, but yeah. So if we're going to put a positive reinforcement slant on that, I think it's almost the same, isn't it? We're finding that where the horse's brain goes, you mean this? And you go, yes, that bit there. You don't wait for 5 walk steps. And I find this is the problem with positive trainers as well, or positive reinforcement based trainers. Sorry, I often shorten that down, and I shouldn't, because they're not going to be positively and good. It's not that thing.
Not the same.
We're talking about people using positive reinforcement based techniques, and even that can be, not that well done. So, whenever you're training, it's thinking about, where does your reinforcer go? Your reinforcer with the leg, if you're using negative, is removal of it, take it off again. And your positive is where you put the mark. And that isn't when you've had 20 walk steps, when you want the horse to actually associate that moment between you changing the environment and the horse going, oh, bingo, it could be this. And you go, yeah, you're so smart. You're amazing. Yeah. So
I think too, you can be clever about your antecedent arrangements. And antecedent arrangements for people that are newer, it's just like the precursor to your behaviors, like all the stuff that happens before the thing that you want to have happen.
Yeah.
But you can be really clever. Like, if you know that the horse likes the gate that's the exit, practice your walk cue from a point where you're aiming towards that, not when you're aiming away from it and it's harder. Away from it's the test, not the training. And so I think people make a mistake of adding tons of leg or adding more pressure or adding the whip in environments where the horse is least likely to go forward to begin with. And so then you end up with a bigger issue, instead of adding your leg in an environment where it is most likely to work with least amount of pressure, so that the horse learns an association between that pressure cue and the behavior that you want, which is to go forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not rocket science. Like, this one really isn't rocket science, but you do have to physically restrain yourself from what you've practiced and what you've been told.
And that is hard.
It's hard.
That is, because you have to do nothing most of the time, and you have to get clean with your cues or your aids. And you have to be understanding how learning theory works. Quick plug, I have a webinar coming up at World Horse Welfare at the end of March, where I'm going to talk about specifically riding and adding the quadrants and how learning theory works, in that situation. For people who are
good timing.
Yeah, I know. This was your idea. I'm amazed. It's wonderful. It's great we found it. But yeah, it's about observing the tiniest try, reinforcing, some people would say rewarding, that's fine, I'm happy. But release of pressure is not a reward. That is just reinforcement. That's how it works.
And that's fine too. Like, I don't have any issue with negative reinforcement for cues that are kind of baked into what you want. So with the leg on and off, like, negative reinforcement is fine. I mean, it can be improved, but it's fine. The problem comes when you think you're using negative reinforcement, but you're actually punishing going forward by adding all of these things to your go picture, your huge spurs, your leg banging, your whip cracking, and your voice and everything else, your seat shoving, and it's just silly. You don't need to do that. It doesn't look good either.
No, it doesn't.
From a judging standpoint.
No, it never does. It's a really bad look. And as we move forward with the social license to operate and paying attention to that, I think we'll see a lot more from all of the different wings of competition riding. I think we have to worldwide, the FBI, but also with individual countries. But for me, I'm going to try and create that behavior using positive reinforcement based methods all the time. But people are not going to be there. We're a tiny, tiny little bubble in the massive big bubble of equestrianism. And we don't think for one moment yet that people can adopt everything. But if you try some of these things and they work, you might be more inclined to then start thinking, gosh, that's a really clever way of working out what I should do with my horse and how I can help them to achieve some sort of communication. Because ultimately, that's what it all comes down to, building communication with your horse, not in a way that is punishing. Okay, so do we have anything more that you want to say on that, or do you want to close on, your feelings around the whole thing? Go on. What are our
I think we could wrap up our takeaways. I think too, one of the things that I want to be clear about, or like caring or open about, is that if you are a coach or a trainer and some of these things are hard to hear, or you're confused, or you don't understand, is to reach out to Trudy or to myself and let's chat. It's not coming from a judgy place of, I think I'm better. It's coming from a place of, I think we can all do better. And I think horse welfare is really in question when we don't apply methods that the horses understand and can follow through with and can do. And so when we go to aggression, fear, punishment, flooding, more of an aid, we risk running into really serious welfare issues that I think in the modern era we can do better at as a group. And the horse world is behind, and we need to catch up, or we're not going to be, it's just not going to be what it used to be. And I think we all need to work towards that. So that was my big
I love that
statement.
I think that's brilliant. I love it. I think for me, the take home sort of messages should be observe your horse, see the things your horse is saying to you. I say that a lot, so I'm boring, but I do think it's really important that we start to observe those tiny, like you said with the jumping, it's like finding the bit before the hard stare, the kind of, I'm worried about this, sort of trying to keep them below that threshold where they just throw everything out because they can't deal with it. I think that's super important. I think people understanding learning theory.
Yes.
If you don't understand at all, don't be put off by the fact it sounds so scientific. It is possible to think of it in a really fundamental way that will help you understand why your negative reinforcement, pressure and release traditional techniques are not working well enough, and how you could be better at them to help you and your horse progress better. So for me, it's that is the biggie, is actually understanding how it works and applying it where you can. And we're all it doesn't always work, does it?
No, sometimes I send you a video of me working on my horse and you tell me that my arrangement is ridiculous and that I should fix it all. So that works.
But then, I'll be training with my dogs and I'll get, somebody who says the same thing. I mean, we are all helping each other. That's the wonderful thing. We should be able to share and say, hey, what do you think about this? And somebody say, well, why didn't you try that? And that's a brilliant idea. I'm stealing it. So, I think
we need to collaborate a lot more in horses too. And I think there's a lot of competition between coaches and trainers. And I think we could all do better to increase horse welfare by just chatting with each other a bit more and being more open-minded to looking at problems from multiple angles and not being so quick to want to apply more pressure to solve the problem, or to send the horse off to a cowboy who will do it for you, or to a more harsh trainer who will do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously I agree with that. So can you tell us, before we go, where we can find you. Tell us about your Instagram. You share some lovely things on Instagram, and your website. Tell us a bit.
Sure. So my horse website is www.leviosaequine.com, and Leviosa is spelled Leviosa. And it's the same for my Instagram, so at Leviosa Equine. If you want to take a look at the kinds of silly things that Samwise and I are up to. Yeah, and I think that's the only way to find me. I mean, I have a phone number and stuff, but you can find that all on the website.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, look her up, because it's some fun stuff going on over there. And did we say you were in Canada? I don't know.
I'm in Canada. I'm on the West Coast in BC.
I wasn't sure if we said that earlier, because it's important, because we can do stuff online, of course, nowadays, but that's where you can find you as well. And dog training is going to be your thing as well, isn't it? Still?
Yeah, I'm still working on my dog training website, but I am up and running. Dog stuff too, all the animals.
Which supercharges your training always when you can work with multiple species, definitely. So if you train your horses, try training your dogs, and think about how you would train the same thing with both species. Cats make you fantastic trainers, because they're just that bit harder than dogs.
They're just not that keen, which makes them great.
They're fun. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We would really appreciate it if you shared this with some people whom you might not have felt you could share other episodes with, because they would have just glazed over in a sea of that behavior stuff. So hopefully this might appeal to some more mainstream people who are struggling and want to think around some of those answers. As always, you can find me at equine.training, and on social media, just Google me, or you know where to find me. Leave us a 5-star thingy, because that's good. We like those things, and
it's reinforcing for both of us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and share the this episode particularly, because it's aimed at, and hopefully Katrina and I can do some more stuff in future. So if you have any questions that you would like us to answer in a pragmatic and practical way, we're your girls. So Thank you for joining me, and we'll have you on again very soon.
Thanks for having me.